Great. So welcome everybody to the World of Kabbalah lesson 4. I am glad that we're continuing this journey together. A few programming notes this afternoon, because it's Hanukkah. By the way, happy Hanukkah, everybody. Hope you've been enjoying the first 3 nights. This afternoon/evening, there will be the Hanukkah lighting at the mall. This lighting has been going on since before I was born. It's been at the Staten Island Mall for 35 years, I believe. And it is Staten Island's longest running and also largest menorah lighting. And I believe that now more than ever, it is vital that every Jew shows up to show the rest of the community that we are united and we stand with our brothers and sisters both here and around the world, but most specifically in the land of Israel. If you spend any time on social media, you know what the situation is right now. For example, today's football Sunday, right? Everyone's playing football today. There's a kicker who plays for the Minnesota Vikings. His name is Greg Joseph. This guy, Greg Joseph, his last name might have given it away. He's Jewish. Okay, he had a bar mitzvah. He put on a mezuzah in his house recently after the attacks, actually. So this month, they're letting the players wear special shoes. Usually there's uniform shoes. Everybody has to wear the same shoes. But now they could all wear shoes to raise money for charity. If you want to raise money for autism, from breast cancer awareness, whatever, you get to design your own shoes. It's like a big deal to get to design their own shoes. So this kid, Greg Joseph, this Jewish boy, he's wearing shoes that say, "I stand with Israel," and has a Magen David, a Star of David on them. And you would think it's a beautiful, wonderful thing. And then you go onto social media and you see all the comments underneath it, and we see what we're actually dealing with, right? So I think it's very important for all of us to show up and also to show the younger generation, people younger than ourselves, that we stand together and we understand the truth and the community is united. And Am Yisrael Chai. I think it's the most powerful statement of Am Yisrael Chai is when we come together and do something positive. We aren't people. We are not a people of slogans and marching and making a hoorah. We do actionable things that bring more light into this world. We've talked about it before, and we'll continue talking about it. The only and best way to fight darkness is with more light. Hanukkah is the festival of lights. The more Jews that gather together to light the lights, the more light we bring into the world. Because of the weather, it's going to be pouring, so the program will likely be indoors. It's in the Shake Shack, not in the Shake Shack. I'm sorry. Right outside the Shake Shack, that entrance into the mall, that's where we're going to be doing the festivities. There is a chance we'll light the menorah outdoors because it's a big menorah and we have flames that are high, so we might actually do the actual lighting outdoors, but we'll see. We'll play it by ear. But either way, bring a raincoat. It's going to be a good time. Latkes, donuts, music, crafts for the kids at 4 o'clock, and the lighting at 5 o'clock. Okay. And besides for that, Monday night, tomorrow evening, there will be a concert at the Young Israel of Staten Island. We booked a gentleman by the name of Lipa Schmelzer. Lipa Schmelzer is a Hasidic singer. He's a very interesting character, very creative. And one of the reasons why we landed on booking him for this job is because after the attacks of October 7th, he flew to Eretz Yisrael, he flew to Israel for a solidarity mission. And he went to a lot of the hospitals where wounded soldiers and the like were recuperating. And he sang for a lot of the wounded soldiers, and he wrote songs specifically for them. And one of the viral clips was him singing to a young Israeli girl who was wounded, protecting her kibbutz. She saved dozens of lives herself. She was an off-duty soldier, and she was able to save many people, but unfortunately she was hurt herself. There are certain people in his community who don't approve of that kind of behavior. So he lost some gigs because of this. So in response to that, Young Israel and Chabad decided we're going to book him for tomorrow night. It's going to be at the Young Israel. It's going to be a high energy, very good show. Some of the songs you'll be familiar with, and some of the songs I'm sure you've never heard before in your life, but it's going to be a good show, I guarantee it. So if you want to buy tickets to that, you could visit chabadsi.com/Yisi concert, Yisi, YISI, for Young Israel Staten Island concert. Okay, and finally, before we actually get into the class, I think it's important that we say together a psalm of Tehillim, a chapter of Tehillim, for our brothers and sisters the world over, but most particularly in the land of Israel. Shir HaMalos, it's on the board. You can follow along. Shir HaMalos v'samachti ba'imrim li beis Adonai nelech. Oilis hayu ragleinu b'sharoich Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim habnuya ki'ir shechubra l'yachtav. Sham alu shvat v'shifta ya edus l'Yisrael l'heidush l'shem Adonai. V'shama yashu chisit l'mishpat kisis l'beis David. Shalu shloim Yerushalayim yishloyu oyevoyach. Yishalem b'chelech shalva v'mernesoyach. This psalm was written by King David over 2,600 years ago, talking about Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the Jewish people. And I think it's very important to say a psalm like this in a time like this.
What number is it?
122.
Oh.
He discusses Jerusalem and how it's the capital of the Jewish people, and all the tribes of Israel strive to go to Jerusalem. I rejoiced when they told me that we're going to the house of God in Jerusalem. This is 2,600 years ago. We've been saying this chapter of Tehillim continuously for 2,600 years. So this idea of this fabrication of the Jewish people being occupiers or colonizers on the Holy Land, it's a farce. And I think it's okay for us to tell the world that it's a farce. So we're allowed to stand up for the truth. And not like that. I'm sorry. It's such a farce. This whole concept is such a farce that we kind of shy away from discussing it because we don't want to offend people. It's ridiculous. The whole argument is ridiculous.
We don't want to offend them with facts.
Exactly. I was actually by the Chabad conference a couple of weeks ago, and one of the rabbis there was saying there was a discussion on how to address the situation of Israel, right? The situation on the ground, and what he basically was saying is once you get into the conversation, you're already lost with these people. Exactly. Because what I say, when you say apartheid and I say apartheid, we're talking about two different words. We can't have a conversation. When you say genocide, it's not. We're not having. If the words don't mean the same thing as to me as they mean to you, we're wasting our time. Mm-hmm. And all you're doing is getting yourself sucked in, and you're already lost. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we have to lay out. We've been here for thousands of years. The Jewish people, we were there before 48, and we're going to continue forever until the end of time, God willing.
I can attest to that.
And Shalom was there herself.
From personal experience. That when you're hit with ridiculous, ignoramus statements like that, all you have to do is present facts. It is incumbent on every Jew to learn the facts, if not the Torah, if not the mystical, spiritual need to get in touch with it, to learn the geographical facts of Israel going back and being able, and even back to 1948, even before that. You know, it is our duty to fight. Bullshit with facts.
It's recorded, Shalom. It's recorded.
It makes a difference. It really makes a difference. Letters to the Advent, telling people, writing. I have been so hit by people who are ignorant, and that when after we speak, they're enlightened. They walk away. They didn't know this stuff because they were sold on the misinformation for years that all these progressive people are doing, and all these, different type of. I don't know.
To put a pin in that, let's show up together.
Yeah.
The idea of Hanukkah is every night we add another light, correct? Night number 1 is 1 light, night number 2 is 2 lights, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The idea is that as we progress, we always have to add in more light. Whatever that means to you, adding in Torah mitzvahs, adding in loving kindness, generosity, bringing more truth into this world. That is the mission, more truth. That is what Hanukkah is about, bringing more light into this world. Okay, we're running a bit behind, so let's get into it. So again, to recap what we've been discussing till now, we have been focusing on Seder Hishtalshelus, the order of devolution of godliness from God himself to the world in which we live. And the entire time that we've been discussing this Seder Hishtalshelus, we've been looking at the pattern, its counterpart within the human soul. So week number 1, we talked about the worlds of separateness, worlds that see themselves as a distinct, created identity. We call those worlds Biyah or Bri Yitzira Asiya, the created worlds that see themselves as outside of God, as a created being. And we said the counterpart within the human soul is the levushei nefesh, or the soul garments, which are thought, speech, and action. And we discussed how thought, speech, and action are not you. You can choose how to behave. Even if you're not feeling good, you could act good. If you're not feeling generous, you could speak generously. And even if you're feeling jealous, you could still think kindly about another person. It does not have to reflect who you are necessarily. You could always be positive. And impact the world in a positive way, even if you're not feeling that way yet. The following week, lesson number 2, we bumped into the world of Atzilus. The world of Atzilus we talked about is godliness, not God himself, but godliness. God as he manifests into 10 distinct characteristics. We talked at length last week and the week before about the character traits of Chachma, Bina, and Das, the intellectual capabilities, and also Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes. Kindness versus severity or discipline, and Tiferes, which we said called beauty or harmonization. And then we talked about how in the human soul, we have similar things known as the soul powers. We are comprised of our intellect and our emotion. And and we discussed how it's important to try to see which one of these 10 things are your strong points, which is your soul root, so to speak. But at the same time, even while you have a certain strong points, because we are comprised of all 10 of them, we have a capability to access all 10 of them in order to make ourselves stronger and better people. And then last week, we got into the idea of the infinite light. We got into the idea of Keter, the crown, something that's above godliness. I'm sorry, something that's above Atzilus. And in the human soul, we discussed how that is the idea of pleasure, how desire, ratzon, will is overpowering and can, when there's a will, there's a way, and it can completely and totally overwhelm all the other things, all the other soul powers. And if you have a desire to do something positive, you can make yourself feel that way or even think that way. You could justify it, etc. So to start today's discussion, we're going to do it a little bit differently than we have in the past. And I would like us all to turn, please, to page 111. And we're going to be doing an exercise together. This is not to share with the class necessarily, because this is private for you, but we're going to do it together, and you'll see why this is going to be important. As objectively as possible, we're on page 111. Respond to each of the following self-reflective statements. Consider each question on its merits without regard for consistency with other responses. So look at each question and just answer that question. And these questions are absolute. Okay, they're yes or no, they're binary. Question number 1, I am a selfish person. Yes or no? Question number 2, I am not a selfish person. Yes or no? Question number 3, at times I really only care about myself and my well-being. Yes or no? Some things are more significant than my existence. I would never knowingly do something to hurt another person. I know that I've hurt others in pursuit of my goals. I sometimes feel glad when someone else fails. I do not want to rejoice over someone else's troubles. When I want something, I find it very difficult to resist it, even when I recognize that it is harmful to my moral and spiritual well-being. I weigh short-term gains against the long-term harm they may invite. We'll give another couple of seconds to finish up the exercise. Okay, so I don't need specific answers for what you wrote down, but by show of hands, did anyone find it difficult to give a definitive answer to some or even all of these questions? To give a definitive answer to any of them? Nobody. Okay. Did you find yourself giving contradictory yes answers to 2 opposing statements? Anybody? Malka did. Shalom. Okay. Jane.
Yeah.
So why is that?
Well, because it says you do not want to rejoice over someone else's troubles. You don't want to, but sometimes you do feel glad someone else feels.
I'm saying there's a lot of these things. Most people would say, if somebody asked them, "Are you a selfish person?" No, but sometimes you do selfish things, right?
Yeah.
So how does that work? We human beings are very complex people. On one hand, there's a part of us that aspires to be altruistic, spiritual, connected to God, connected to higher purpose. On the other hand, there's another part of us that is governed by strictly selfish instincts. And the question is, what's actually going on? And what's actually going on? Why is it that we have these 2 divisive forces, opposing forces, actually? They're actually not just divisive forces. They oppose one another. They're in contrast to one another. How is it that we contain both of them? What's going on? So, Barbara, could you please do me a favor? Read text number 1.
2 souls.
Yes.
Jewish mysticism explains that any.
Just go to text 1 where it says the first of our souls. No, I'm sorry. Page 112. I'm sorry.
All right, well, you have to be very specific with it. So what am I saying?
The first of our souls, yeah.
The first of our souls originates in non-holiness. The soul resides in our bloodstream to vitalize our body. It is the source of all our negative character traits, as well as those positive traits that come naturally to us, such as compassion and kindness.
So Kabbalah tells us that why is it that you have 2 conflicting drives within you? Because as a matter of fact, you don't only contain 1 soul within you, you have 2 souls. Has anyone here ever heard of the book of the Tanya? The Sefer HaTanya, the book of Tanya? Anyone ever studied the Tanya even a little bit? Beatrice. So what is the main thesis of the book of the Tanya? discussing, it opens up talking about these two souls. And it's the one long discussion about these two souls and how it impacts us and how to understand it as best to live our lives in accordance to the divine will with those two souls. So these two theaters of consciousness within us that exist within us, you have the selfish drive and you have the selfless drive, they exist because we have two souls within us. The first soul is called the Nefesh HaBahamis. The Nefesh HaBahamis, which is generally translated as the animal soul. The animal soul. So what's important to understand is that it's not an animal soul in the sense that it's akin to an animal, because it's much more complex than an animal soul. We do believe, Kabbalah believes that animals also have a soul, but this is much more developed. It's a human soul. Absalom?
Would it be more accurate to say savage?
Because savage is not the right word either.
No, okay.
There's a reason. We'll discuss why they call it the animal soul, but it's much more intelligent. It's much more complex than an animal soul, but we do call it the animal soul. Why? Because it has certain qualities that are similar to animal life. What is an animal concerned about?
So we are animals.
Scientifically, we are, but in Judaism, we believe we're much more than animals, right? We're in a separate class than animals in Judaism. But this animal soul is very similar to animals. Why? Because what's an animal about? Survival. What's an animal about? And an animal's entire being is what's good for me. So this animal soul is all about what is good for me right now in this moment. I'm not thinking about tomorrow. I'm not thinking about the day after. What is good for me right now? It's also important to point out that the animal soul is not evil. It is not evil. When you go to South Africa and you go to Kruger National Park and you see the wild animals running around and having a blast, and a leopard chases down a gazelle and rips out its throat and then mauls it and eviscerates it and starts eating it, is the leopard doing an evil act in the moment? Absolutely not. Because what's the leopard doing? Leopard's hungry, leopard needs to eat. So leopard needs to eat. What's leopard got to do? Leopard has to kill gazelle. So the animal soul within the
So
human...
it's following instinct.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, Mandy, it's me, Lisa. I said, so it's just following its own instinct.
100%.
That's all.
All about instinct. Everything that an animal does, even when an animal cares for its young, right? The love that an animal feels for its young is because it has a biological imperative to propagate the species, and therefore it makes it feel good to take care of this young one. Correct? Everything an animal does is driven by instinct.
I learned about salmon swimming upstream. And why are they going against the water to go back where they can lay their eggs? Because it feels good for the salmon to have the pressure on its head going against the stream.
Wow, interesting. I mean,
That was really why.
that is very interesting. That's very interesting. So, but because this animal soul is all about self-interest, it's all driven by its own desires, what makes it feel good, so it can justify all sorts of selfish things. If something's standing in the way of my pleasure in this moment, I'm going to bulldoze that other thing, that other person, in order to get what I want. Similar to an animal. An animal doesn't care about the concerns of the gazelle, that the gazelle is just living its life on the Serengeti. It's hungry, it's going to stop it, it's going to kill it, it's going to eat it.
Gives up. Well, many times an animal is injured, it'll give up. You think that's the animal soul departing from him? Or do the two souls work together? You know what I'm saying?
The two souls do work together, which we're going to talk about a lot today, but I'm not totally sure.
You wonder.
I'll have to think about it.
You know,
Not
give
totally.
up. Soul is giving up.
Survival.
Isn't that also instinct?
It is an animal soul.
It's like semi,
Yeah.
comatose state, to
Yeah.
make it easier for them to die.
Yes, it's a
Right.
survival thing too.
It's also
You're
instinct.
trying
They
to
don't
survive the
think.
moment.
Which would more be the animal soul, because
Yeah, the godly soul never gives up.
Yes, that's what I'm
We'll
saying.
talk about, and we'll see why
Yeah.
the godly soul can't ever give up. It's not hardwired to do that. It actually wasn't supposed to be part of the discussion, but we'll see later on how it
Yeah.
plays into that. Half the class, really. Next week. One of the very interesting things about the animal soul, as we said in text 1, as the Alter Rebbe says in text 1, is that even the source of positive traits that come naturally to us are also the realm of the animal soul. Meaning that certain people are just hardwired to be kind, to do good things. Why? Because it feels good, right? Most people, when you do good things, why are you doing good things? Maybe I scratch your back, you scratch mine, and maybe it makes me feel good to think of myself as a good person. So according to Kabbalah, even that idea comes from the animal soul. Because why am I doing it? Because it makes me feel good. I'm not doing it for the other person. I'm not doing it for the mission. I'm not doing it for a higher purpose for God. I'm doing it because it makes me feel good in the moment. The animal feeds its young, not because it wants the young to feel good, but because it has a biological imperative to propagate the species.
That just bolsters the idea that it's not a negative soul.
Exactly. It's not an unholy thing. Yes. It is not evil. It can be the source of very evil things, but it is not in and of itself evil. By the way, I think we shared the story earlier in the class, but the story goes that a chassid comes to the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, and he was a wealthy man, and he used to give a lot of charity to the poor in his town. And he told the Alter Rebbe, you know, when I give this charity, it makes me feel good, right? I feel good that now this poor widow is able to heat her house in the winter and her kids are taken care of. And I know that based on what you teach us in Tanya, the fact that I feel good means that what's the instinct, what's driving me to give this charity in this moment? My animal soul, right? And I should want to be bigger and better than that. So the Alter Rebbe said, that woman, does she care when her house is warm in the winter? Does she care if it's from the animal soul? Yes or no? No, absolutely not. So the animal soul is not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, Malka's point is a very valid point, and we should mention that here. But at the same time, because it is all about selfishness, self-gratification. It's all self-oriented. Therefore, it can be the source of all of our evil tendencies. When I wake up in the morning and I'd rather take another 15 minutes to hit the snooze button than to make sure I'm on time to shul, why am I doing that? Because there's a driver within me that just wants to do what's easy, the path of least resistance, whatever makes me feel good in this moment. Not think about the fact that when I hit the snooze button, I'm losing 15 minutes, and future me is going to regret the fact that I took that time. Because the animal soul doesn't care about future Mendy. The animal soul is right now, what makes Mendy feel good right now, right? Doesn't think forward. So that is the animal soul. We're clear on the animal soul for now? The concept of the animal soul? Has anyone here heard of this concept before today? No? Okay. Well, I think it's a very...
Let me ask you a question. You know, think about it. Freud.
Yeah.
Had id, ego, superego. Is this the id that we're talking about?
I'm not a Freud scholar, but I believe so. It's actually very interesting.
It's the fight between the id and the superego. That's what the ego is.
I want to tell you something after we end the recording, okay?
Okay.
All right? Something about Freud and Alter Rebbe after we end the recording.
He's Jewish.
He was Jewish.
And he took a lot of his stuff.
He happened to be a proud Jew, by the way. Yes. We talked about Freud, so I'm just going to say the story. He once went to Rome and he took a picture of the Arch of Titus, which showed the Jews in captivity, the menorah in captivity. It's Hanukkah, right? It's very famous, the Arch of Titus, with that whole image of the Jews being paraded through the streets of Rome after the destruction of the Holy Temple. And he bought a postcard in Rome of the Arch of Titus, and he sent it back to a friend in Vienna, right? He sent it back to a friend in Vienna. The Yud Uberstadt, the Jew survives it. That the Arch of Titus was built 1900 years ago, and where's Titus? Where's the Roman Empire? It's gone, it's finished. But the Jews are still here. But that's just parenthetical. Because you mentioned Rome, I just felt we should, because you mentioned Freud, I felt like we should return it. So that's the first of our souls, the Nefesh HaAmis. And later on, we'll talk about why we call it the first soul. That's actually important to remember that we call the Nefesh HaBahamis, the animal soul, we call it the first soul. We also have a second soul known as the Nefesh Elikis, or the godly soul. We're going to call it the godly soul today. What does the godly soul want? All the godly soul wants is a closer relationship with God and with other souls as well, because it sees its counterpoint in other people as souls that are parts of God. And because it wants to be closer to God, all that the Nefesh Elikis, all that the godly soul wants to do is be closer to God and to do what God wants, to fulfill the missions that God gave it to accomplish in this world. And it's the spirit that lives inside us that motivates us to want to access real goodness and not expect anything in return for itself. The Nefesh HaBahamis, the animal soul, is only concerned about with its needs. The godly soul is focused on what God wants, or in order to help other people, right? Like JFK said, ask not what you could do, your country could do for you, what you could do for your country. 150 years before JFK said that, the Alter Rebbe had a meeting with a chassid, and the chassid comes to the Alter Rebbe and he tells him that, I have a hard time with Parnasa, financially we're not doing great. I have my kids, I need to marry off my kids. All these, we have health issues, all these things that he needs. He has all these problems. So Alter Rebbe says, you've been telling me for so long everything that you need. What about what you're needed for? Right? This is one of the Alter Rebbe's main things you have to think about. Not what do I need, what am I needed for? 150 years before JFK. Not that it wasn't a great line. It was an all-timer what JFK said, right? But the Alter Rebbe said it 150 years earlier because the Nefesh Elokis, what's the Nefesh Elokis' attitude? What am I needed for in any given situation? In any given instance, what am I needed for? How can I help somebody else? How can I help fulfill God's mission? What can I do to be closer to God? What am I needed for in this circumstance? Whatever that is, in every single scenario. So again, the Nefesh Bahamas, the animal soul, is what is good for me right now, and the Nefesh Elokis is what am I good for in any given circumstance. That's the dichotomy. That's the two sides of the coin that resides within us. So now that we understand a little bit, at least, these two souls and the driving motivations, which of these two souls do you think is stronger? I leave it to you. Which of these two souls do you think is stronger?
The first soul.
The first soul, the animal soul. Does anybody disagree with M. Shalom? M. Shalom, why do you say the first soul is stronger?
Because it is so immediate, the immediacy of it.
Okay.
And there's been a less thought.
Okay. Jimmy, why do you disagree?
But when the animal soul is so destroyed, the other soul keeps him going.
Okay,
No matter
interesting.
how
Okay.
devastated we are, and really shouldn't go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That is an interesting thought, Barbara.
Well, if the animal soul wasn't so strong, we wouldn't have conflict all the time.
Very good. Put it this way. One way to see that the animal soul is stronger is this afternoon, the Jets are playing in MetLife Stadium. And so is Ethan. The Jets are a terrible, terrible football team. Terrible football team. I'm sorry. I hate to say it. It's been this way my whole life. I'm trying to get over it. You know what I'm saying? Terrible football franchise. It's going to be pouring rain. Okay? It's going to be pouring rain. How many people do you think are going to be in the stadium? It's going to be packed. Every seat will be filled, right? And before the game, there's going to be people in the parking lot drinking beer, having a great time. It's actually not even a great example. The college football season, all right? The college football season, you have these stadiums of 90,000 people, let's say in Michigan. Michigan in January is freezing cold, right? It's freezing cold. And we know the students are, of course, they're not drinking any alcohol because they're under 21. And none of the students are drinking any beer at the game, God forbid. And yet, if you look at the stadium, watch the game. It's going to be this. They're in the college football playoff. There's going to be 90,000 people there. 40% of the student section is going to be a bunch of guys without their shirts on in sub-0 degree weather. They're going to be cheering and they're going crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Today at the mall, God willing, right? It's going to be raining. Even this class, because of this rain in the forecast, people didn't come out, right? So which soul is stronger? Which soul gets us to do things right now? Like M. Shalom says, it's the immediacy. We're much more excited to wake up on a Saturday if we have a golf 18 holes booked at the golf course. We'll get up early to go to the golf course, than to go to shul to listen to the rabbi. Even if I understand the rabbi gives a great speech, we love the rabbi. He was from the Torah. It's awesome. It's great. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. It's super. What are you more excited for? If we're being honest with ourselves, what do you post on Instagram when you go to Aruba on vacation, or when you light the menorah? I mean, hopefully you do both. But what gets more likes? If we're being honest with ourselves. The animal soul is stronger. That's why we call it the animal soul. Let's say an elephant can raise something like 600 pounds just with his trunk. A chimpanzee weighs less than me, but it's actually 4 times stronger than me. It's a scientific fact.
You would be fighting with yourself all the time.
Well, with that premise, then we'd be better off if the animal soul wasn't as strong.
So we're going to talk about why it's important. Barbara, we're going to talk about why that's important. That is a good point, Jimmy. And we're going to we're going to see why we need it. It's gonna be touched on. It's gonna be touched
The
on.
part that when you're born, you have already, it's already, then it's about.
Don't jump ahead. Don't jump ahead.
No,
No, while we're here, Yiddi's saying we called it the first soul. Why do we call it the first soul? Because when you're born, what do you know how to do? Which of these two streams of consciousness do you know how to do instinctively? And which one do you need to learn, be taught how to behave? When a child is hungry, he cries. Does a child cry when somebody else is hungry? Absolutely not. My sister just had a baby, Mazel Tov to Mushki and Mendy. When that baby wakes up in the middle of the night, it's hungry. It's 3 a.m. Her parents fell asleep maybe 2 hours earlier. She's hungry, she cries. Why? Because I'm hungry, I cry. I don't care about the other person. And that's normal, that's healthy. They're not supposed to care about the other people, right? This little baby shouldn't be concerned about our parents' well-being. We're born in a way that automatically we are selfish. We have to train ourselves to be selfless. That is, Yiddi's bringing up a very important point, which we're going to get to later in the class. It's called the first soul because when you're born, the animal soul, it's present and it's fully part of you. The godly soul comes a little bit later, and it only, as we mature, it invests itself more within us, and we're able to access it more as we mature. That's what happens at Bar and Bas Mitzvah, by the way. That is why we celebrate Bar and Bas Mitzvah, because at that point, the animal soul fully invests, the godly soul fully invests itself within you, and that's why we expect these 12 and 13-year-old children, we call them adults, because at this point, they should be able to access this selfless part of themselves in order to live a more godly, more mature life. But these two souls are constantly in competition for our hearts and our minds. And that kind of explains why when we did that exercise, you had all these binary questions, which are both true for us, right? We don't see ourselves as people who would ever root for somebody else to fail. But there are times if we're being honest with ourselves, it makes it okay, if we're being honest with ourselves, which is very important for us. And why is it? Because the godly soul is all about other. It's all about mission. It's all about God. The animal soul is all about me, and it's all about me, and it's all about me. And this is perfectly healthy and perfectly normal. And there are reasons why we need the animal soul. I don't know if somebody mentioned this. If we only had godly souls, we wouldn't live very long, right? It's like that bagel and the butter. If all you had was your godly soul and you didn't care about survival, how long would we last? We need the animal soul to keep us here, but that's a separate point. So, fine. Everybody ready to move on from here? We have the two souls. Let's see any slides. Okay, focus on for natural kiss, animal soul. Which is stronger? We established that the animal soul by default is stronger. They use the word robust. Okay, that's good. That's great. So now I have a question for you. We've been studying the past 3 lessons is all about how you have the order of devolution. You have the Seder Hishtalshelus, all of this godliness that's coming down from God Himself to this world. And the human soul is patterned on this Seder Hishtalshelus, on this order of devolution. So now, how is it possible that if the human soul is reflecting Seder Hishtalshelus, if it's all about reflecting this order of devolution from God to this world, where does this animal soul come from? How is it possible to have a part of ourselves which, so to speak, denies God, denies the mission, denies God's will, is selfish? If we're all about being patterned, our entire psyche, our entire soul is a reflection of godliness, the right-hand side or the right-hand side. So where is the animal soul coming from? How is that possible?
You're asking, you want us to.
This is a jumping off point to the rest of the class, but I'm Shalom Yeshua. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think it comes from God.
Of course it does. It's important for us to remember, by the way, whenever we discuss, it all comes from God. That's our belief.
But remember, I'm saying God has that in Him too.
We're going to see exactly. That's going to be today's class. That's the whole point of the class. I think the animal soul and the godly soul is a very important. I think that is the crux of the class. So the question is, where does this animal soul come from? What do we need it for? And how is it possible, basically? We have to understand that because we're looking at it through a Kabbalistic lens, and we're learning about all these different levels of the order of devolution, the Seder Hishtalshelus, this chain from God to our world, where does the animal soul come from Kabbalistically? So we're going to jump into, we're going to make a significant detour right now to everything that we've been talking about till now. And we are going to be discussing one of the more subtle, more difficult concepts in Kabbalah, known as lights and vessels, oiros and kelim. In lesson 2, we talked about that God chose to manifest the 10 sefirot, these 10 divine attributes, which created the world of Atzilus, this green world. And if you look actually in the map, you'll see that each one of these sefirot, each one of these attributes, the way they drew it is that they have 2 colors, right? There's like the gray and the, honestly, I don't even know what color that is. Somebody's gonna have to. Purple? Pink? Yeah.
Violet.
Sure, violet. We'll go with violet. We'll go with violet. So, and the reason for that is because each sephira is actually made up of 2 components. We didn't discuss this till now because we're saving it for today. Each one of these sephiras, each one of these divine attributes are made up of 2 components, which we're going to learn about in the following text number 3. Beatrice, if you could please, on page 114, text number 3. This is a quote from the Zohar.
To appreciate the secret of the animal soul's superior energy, We must first sharpen our understanding of the Sifra explored earlier in lesson 2.
Oh, okay.
As we will now learn, each Sephira consists of 2 highly dissimilar elements: a divine light that energizes the Sephira, and a spiritual vessel that contains and channels the light.
Can you read where it says Atzilus to unity? Beatrice?
Yeah.
Could you read that?
Oh.
The king is present. Yeah.
The king is present with the 10 attributes of Absolute. He and his vessels are one in that world, and he and his lights are one in that world.
All right. Thank you, Beatrice.
You're welcome.
By the way, I should have mentioned this earlier. This whole map of the human soul, of the intellectual capabilities, the emotional capabilities, and the soul garments, what we're learning today is that we have each of these 2 times. This whole chain from pleasure/desire all the way down to action, we don't have once, we have it twice for each soul. The godly soul has all of these, and the animal soul has all of these. And what we're going to be talking about today is, where does the animal soul's all of these come from? So like Beatrice said, the king is present within the 10 attributes of Atzilus. He and his vessels are one, he and his lights are one. So what are lights and what are vessels? What are lights and what are vessels? What we're talking about now, it's all spiritual, right? But we're going to give examples of what light and what vessel might mean in this context. So in the language of Kabbalah, light is the abstract energy behind any given reality, while the vessel is the structure that shapes it and gives it form and executes it. I'll give you a couple examples in our world. We see on actually page 115, figure 4.1, they give us a couple of examples. Let's say you have a book, right? Why are you writing a book? Why does anybody write a book? To give over an idea, right? So the light is the idea. The vessel would be the words. Because a book without an idea is just a bunch of splotches on a paper. It's nothing. It contains no content. But an idea without the words is a light without the vessel, because you can't convey it to anybody else. We're just talking light and vessels. Put the animal soul and the godly soul. We're going to put it in the trunk for a couple of seconds, and we're going to get back to it. Now we're going to be discussing light and vessels. Here's another example. Let's say electricity. Electricity, let's think of it as light in this context. You can do lots of different things with electricity. You have the lights right here. You have the computer. You have the TV screen. It's all electricity. It's all electricity. The difference between my computer and the TV and the light and your washing machine is in the vessel itself. How are you channeling that light, that energy? How are you channeling that energy? That's what we call vessel. Think about the book. A book is an idea that you want to put down into a vessel in order to be able to relay content to another person. So a book without an idea, words without an idea, is useless. An idea without words is also functionally useless, because you can't give it to somebody else, right? Language without ideas behind it doesn't mean anything. We all decided that DOG means an animal that walks on 4 legs, and we love them, they're cuddly, and they play fetch with them. That's what we all decided. But D, O, and G don't mean anything without the idea of dog being contained within it. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Another example is a relationship. I think they have it right. They have it over here. A relationship with another person, with a significant other. Love is the light, and the vessel would be the actions that actually show your love. You can love somebody from today till tomorrow, but if there's no action involved, there is no relationship. But if you do loving gestures for somebody else without the love behind it, there's also no relationship, because there's no light contained within those things. Another good example is in Judaism. Oftentimes when I visit somebody and I ask them if they want to put on tefillin or do something else, or light Shabbos candles, or do something actionable Jewish, they say, Ani Yehudi balev. It's a particularly Israeli affliction. I'm a Jew in the heart. I'm a Jew in the heart. That's not Judaism. Judaism is that I do the mitzvah with the emotion, right? With the drive. Think about also music. What are the most popular songs of all time? What's a smash hit?
Yesterday.
Okay,
One of
fine.
the most sold.
So
That's one of the biggest ones.
they're trying to. There's an emotion that's driving. I don't know, John Lennon,
No,
Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney has an emotion that he's trying to give over, and he puts it into the musical notes. So if he has no musical notes, he can't convey that emotion to you. And if there's no emotion in the musical notes, it's going to thud. It's not going to work, right? It's going to be it'll flop. Malka.
Anyone who's been to a student recital can tell you that.
If there's no emotion in the
There's
music.
no emotion in the music.
And which one?
Where?
Saying a student recital,
Oh, student
Why?
recital.
where they're following the notes, but they don't have the intent of the emotion yet, and it just doesn't work.
And it's a universal language. Right?
So Kabbalistically, everything is made up of light and vessels. Light is, let's say, the animating force, and vessels is the defining, concretizing thing that focuses that energy and makes it something actionable. Okay? So now, okay, we're going to skip some slides. Does anybody have any thoughts on this idea of lights versus vessels? Okay. So now let's apply this idea to godliness. Here's where it gets tricky and subtle. And like I said before, you have to halt cup. You have to hold your head. Okay? And we're going to explain it as simply as possible. When you learn more Kabbalah, as we're all going to do after this course ends, you learn more Kabbalah, you learn more Chassidut, gets more and more subtle, gets more and more esoteric, but also more verstandig, the more you learn it. But we're going to explain it together, and hopefully we'll be able to convey the light within a vessel that we could all contain. All right? So when God emanated his infinite ability, remember that Or Ein Sof, that infinite light, into the Sephiros, he projected 10 energies. We have 10 energies. Each of these divine energies was tasked with producing a particular Sephira, one of these divine attributes. But they themselves, those lights, were only raw power. They were raw energy. They were the lights. They were the Orot. All they were was lights. With this alone, with just Orot, with only lights, you can't have any attributes because it's undefinable. So energy, and it's just pure, unadulterated energy. It's non-definable. And this is actually why we call it light. Why do we say light? Why does Kabbalah use the word Or all the time? Or Ein Sof, the light of the Ein Sof. Last week we talked about the idea of light because light reflects its source constantly. You could tell what type of light is in a room based on what source is giving the light just by feeling or seeing the light. We could all see the difference between sunlight, LED light, or somebody help me out, another fluorescent candlelight. We see it very clearly. Light and source are always completely, intrinsically, forever connected. A light cannot be devoid of its source. It can't.
It reveals its source.
Oh, very good. Exactly. Light's job is to reveal its source. That's what light sees itself as. We actually see it in fire. Fire, to my knowledge, is the only thing that does its best not to exist. What does fire do? Fire wants to go back to its source, so it will annihilate everything that keeps it here and hope to escape, because it wants to go back to its source. That's what light is. Light is always seeking to escape its source. I want to go back to my source because I'm so close to my source. I want to go back there. You turn off the light bulbs right now, it's dark immediately. When the rain clouds leave the rain, even after the sun comes out, there's still rain on the floor. There's still rain on the ground because energy exists without its source. Light does not exist without its source because it's intrinsically connected. So lights by themselves, these divine lights, quote unquote, cannot be Sephirot. They cannot be divine attributes by themselves because they are from the Ein Sof. They transcend attributes. They are infinite. I transcend definition. Light transcends definition. So they are just abstract energies which are given the job to make energies. To make specific attributes. To give an example, when you find out that your son had a conflict on the bus on the way home from school because this 5-year-old boy gets on the bus and they drive home for 45 minutes and there's no matron on the bus and there's no adult supervision. So what happens once in a while? Somebody gets bullied on the bus. So now, when a parent hears that their kid is bullied, you feel an upsurge of energy, of emotion. But right now, when you have that upsurge of emotion, it could go lots of different ways. It could go towards an outpouring of love to my child. They had this experience, so all I need to do right now is give more love to that child. It can also be channeled to anger to the school administrators. What were you thinking putting 12 5-year-olds on a bus without adult supervision? Of course, something's going to happen. It's also possible, by the way, that you channel this energy, this emotion, into compassion for this child who did the bullying. Because we understand that why do bullies bully? Because they have issues at home or within themselves, and they like to lash out at people that they feel more powerful than. Because they feel powerless in other areas in their life, and when they find somebody that they feel more powerful over, they want to, everybody wants to control the world around them. So they find a way to lay down the law on somebody less powerful than them. And you think about the fact that maybe this kid, this bully, his father is in the army and he's not home a lot, and he doesn't have direction. And maybe that's the reason why he's having a hard time being kind to other kids. So again, you have this upsurge of emotion, and you could channel it in many different ways. Think about the way we're all feeling about Eretz Yisrael, the way we're all feeling about Israel. So you have this very strong, very raw energy within you, this very raw emotion, and it could go lots of different ways. You could channel it towards Israel advocacy, truth telling. You could channel it to posting hostage signs. You could channel it towards doing more mitzvahs to help bring them home, calling your congressman. There's many different ways it could go, right? So when God emanates these 10 lights, they're just the raw energy. It could go many different ways. And because they're just this raw energy, they're just light, they don't want to be there anymore. Because what does light want to do? Light wants to escape. Light wants to go home. Light says, I don't want to be here. My job is not my job. My entire being is source. I want to go back to source. Source, 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 source. That's all I want. That's all I could see. So now how is it that we got the actual Sefirot? How do we get the actual attributes? If it's all light and light doesn't want to be here. So that's why God also emanated 10 vessels, 10 beings, 10 entities, not beings, 10 entities of structure, of organization, and of definition, of a limited, of finiteness, or finitude, right? We decided that's a word, finitude. They're not called oros, they're not called lights because they don't see themselves as connected as the lights to God. They see themselves as defined, as limited, as my job is to create structure. My job is to go, not to go up, my job is to go down. Because we want to bring more structure to this world. We want to make things more concrete. We want to make things actionable. That's the way vessels see themselves. We call them in Kabbalah kelim, which you translate as vessels, because honestly, we don't have a better word for that. I'm sorry, kelim.
When you dip the,
Yeah, kelim. Yeah, because it means vessels. Yes, exactly. Very good. So when you have the oros in the kelim, when you have the lights vested in the vessels, that's how you have the attributes. That's how you have the Sefirot, like we call them in Kabbalah. Shalom, please do me a favor. Read text 4a. And you're going to do 4b, but we'll have a little discussion first. Page 116.
From abstract to defined. The light itself is in a state of simple abstractness. The vessel imposes a definition on the light in the form of particular attributes of wisdom, kindness, and so forth.
Just for now. We'll stop there for now. So the divine oros, the lights, are just generic rays of godliness. They're just godliness, unadulterated godliness. And without the kelim, without the vessels, without structure, without form, they can't produce anything. The kelim are the ones that say, hey, I'm going to be chesed, I'm going to be kindness, or I'm going to be gevura. And we're going to give structure to it. They're like, but the kelim at the same time, the vessels are kind of like a sequence of words without any meaning behind them. What gives the kelim, what gives the vessels their energy, what animates them? The light animates them. It's the idea of the book, the idea behind the word. When we think of any word, table, we vested within those letters the concept of table, right? That's the light. You need both of them in order to convey an idea, in order to produce content that's conveyable to somebody else. You need both of these ideas. So oros and kelim have to work in tandem. Okay? So we're going to make one more point about vessels and lights, and then we're going to just chew on it for a couple of seconds. Again, what do lights want to do? What do they see themselves as? What is their entire reason d'être, raison d'être? Well, why do they just want to go home?
Yeah.
We're like all about light.
We need it to see.
But light doesn't really care what you want, right? Light is all about, I want to go back to my source. So these godly lights, these abstract energies, what do they want to do? They want to go back to God. They want to go home. These kelim, these vessels, what do they want to do? I want to be about definition. Don't hack me a chinik about infinity. I don't care about infinity. That's not my job. My job is definition. My job is concreteness. That's a word now. We're making that a word. We just gave that word light, right? My job is to try to define things, to try to build things. I don't care about the source. I want to go further down. I want to create the rest of the worlds because that's all I care about. But these two things have to work in tandem. If they don't work in tandem, you can't have attributes. We can't have the world of Atzilut. They wouldn't exist together. So they have to, so to speak, break themselves. They each have to not break themselves. They have to submit themselves to a higher purpose. Barbara,
What is the story about God made the vessels and they broke the shadow?
hold up. That's the next thing.
Oh.
That's the next thing. That's the next thing, Barbara.
I love that.
It's literally on page, in a couple of pages. That's the next thing. So Shalom, read 4b actually, if you don't mind.
And the lights of Atzilut, by their very nature, are abstract. They also aspire to return to their source and to become wholly subsumed within their sublime origin. Accordingly, they are far removed from creating the worlds of Berea, Yetzirah, and Asiya. Rather, the lights must first install themselves into the vessels of Atzilut in order to energize the creation of the worlds.
So as we talk about light and vessels, it's very clear that in order for Oros, lights and vessels to work together, both Oros and Kalim, both lights and vessels have to go against their natural inclination, their natural tendencies. Because Oros, light, because it's intimately connected to their source, they'd rather be abstract than defined, and they'd rather be subsumed within their source than channeled into something else. They don't care. And on the other hand, Kalim, the vessels don't feel their source as much, or really care to be connected to it. And the whole idea of Kalim is that they want to pull away from light. They want to pull away from abstractness. They want to get more defined. They want to get more concrete. They want to get more structured. And
in every device, in electricity, you have resistors. The power comes and that slows down the energy to be able to not blow it up. The computer takes away less than a microwave and a washing machine, and the power lines that come across country, the voltage is so strong. And you have transmitters, resistors that slow it down, and to be able to break it down into whatever you need.
so the lights want to be, I want to go back to the powerhouse, where's it, Niagara Falls, wherever we get our energy from. The generator back in Indian Point Energy, that still exists? No? So I just want to go back to electricity. I just want to be electricity. This idea that I should go fuel a microwave, that's anathema to the electricity. It has to be the resistors, it's called. It has to be shaped by the resistors. They have to work together. So how is it possible for Oros and Kalim to collaborate? Why is it that lights and vessels are able to together form the divine attributes? And Shalom, I'm sorry, it says 4C and 4D, so you're gonna have to read all of them. Okay.
4C. Our lights, opposite forces, lights and vessels are inherently opposites. The lights, by their very nature, are abstract. They also aspire to return to their source and to become wholly subsumed within their sublime origin. By contrast, vessels have a defined nature. They desire to retain their configuration and are naturally inclined to descend to lower realms.
So if Kalim and lights are anathema to one another, and they have totally distinct and opposing driving forces, how is it that they're able to work together to create Atzilut and Shalom 4D?
They are entirely submitted to God's intent for creation, namely that the universe should become an orderly habitat and not be left in chaos.
So imagine a man and wife are at home, and it's Sunday morning, and they're having a very nice time together, and they're really connecting, and the husband is super in love with the wife, all right? But somehow the wife lets the husband know that she would really like, a hot bagel from the store. Okay? So what does the husband want to do? On the one hand, he wants to be with his wife. He doesn't want to leave. He wants to be with her, but he wants to be to the one he loves. He doesn't want to run away. He wants to go back to the source of the love. But on the other hand, if he actually cared about doing what his love wants him to do, what would he choose to do in that moment? Leave and go get that bagel, right? Leave and go take care of it. Or use DoorDash to get it delivered, right? Whatever that is. So the lights, the Oros and the Kalim, they sense, the lights and the vessels, they sense that what does God desire? God desires that there should be this Atzilus. And because they sense what God desires, they're willing to submit themselves to the plan and collaborate in order to create the divine attributes. Jimmy, it seems like you wanted to say something.
Well, back to the thing you said, Hashem can't be contained, but that's the vessels are containment. Well, light is non-containable. So in a strange way, the vessels are a lesser soul than the light. And again, you said God doesn't need anything he wants.
Yeah.
But it seems he needed the vessels to contain the light.
When we learn Kabbalah, this is actually the danger of Kabbalah. What we need to understand is God didn't need to do anything. God chose to create the world. What Kabbalah says is God could have created the world however he wanted.
But it could be a contradiction.
For whatever reason, God chose to create the world in this way. the way Kabbalah understands it, why did God choose to create the world in this way? In order that we should be able to understand it as much as possible.
We need it.
And in order for us to understand it as best as possible, be able to look within ourselves and see that pattern within our souls, and to use that to understand God better, to understand ourselves better, and understand our place in the world better.
So the vessel as a containment instrument, it doesn't lessen the purity of.
It doesn't, not the purity, but the intensity, yes.
It doesn't.
It does limit the intensity.
It down for us.
It does
Yes.
water down for
The
us,
intensity.
which we use as our animal soul is in need.
We're actually, no, we're going to see the animal soul is quite different. Quite different.
Needs it.
Sure.
So the Atzilut, which is the 10th Sephirah, is actually opposite the Beria, Yetzira, and Asiya, which is the thought, speech, and action. So in other words, that's the vessel. The thought, speech, and action are the
No,
vessel.
even in Atzilut, you have the vessel.
Percentage.
Yes, because you have, let's say, we called it, let's say, Gevura and Chesed,
Yeah.
kindness and severity.
Oh.
Even that's within Atzilut. Even that has the light and the vessel. And that's the idea. They had the different colors, right? The gray and the
Yeah, you always take the
mauve,
five.
sure.
Yeah.
So the lights are the gray, and the vessels are the color underneath. And why they're different colors? Yes, those are the vessels. Yes.
Oh, shoot. Okay, all right.
Okay, before we move on to Barbara's point, the world of chaos, the broken vessels. We learned about vessels. Anybody have anything they want clarified before we move on? Wow, we're actually running very late. Okay. So now we just learned about Atzilut. Now what's important is we learned a lot about Atzilut, that world. The Kabbalists tell us there's actually 2 editions of Atzilut, right? Just as there are 2 souls within us, there's 2 editions in Atzilut, of Atzilut. One is the one that we've been discussing till now. We discussed in lesson 3, lesson 2, a little bit in lesson 3, and a little bit today. And one is going to be our discussion now. And honestly, I hope we'll be able to get through everything today because we're a bit crunched for time. So in order to understand this next bit about the first edition, so to speak, of Atzilut, we turn to the beginning of the Genesis story, the beginning of creation. So the Torah tells us, we could read it on text 5. It's also on the board. In the beginning of God's creation of the heavens and the earth was chaotic and desolate. Darkness was on the surface of the deep, and God's spirit hovered over the water. God said, let there be light, and there was light. So what does it mean that the world was chaotic? What does it mean the world was desolate? What does it mean that God's spirit was hovering? What does all that mean? So let's look up on the thing on the board. When it says Yehi Or, that God said, let there be light, Kabbalah tells us this is referring to the emanation of Atzilut. This world over here, these 10, the lights and the vessels of Atzilut, the 10 attributes. When God said, let there be light, that's what happened. Now, when it says that the world was desolate and chaotic, the word tohu. Have anybody, you guys ever heard the word tohu before? Tohu.
No.
Remember this word tohu, it's going to be important. Tohu means chaos. Tohu means chaos. So when it says that the world was chaotic, very good. When it says the world, I'm sorry? When it says that the world was chaotic and desolate, this is talking about an emanation that existed before Atzilus. And we're going to talk about that now. God giving light. It existed. It existed before.
Did God make it?
Yes, God made it exist. God makes everything exist. That's the way Kabbalah understands it. Everything comes from God. And it's important for us also to remember that everything happens for a purpose. When God created this world of chaos, it did not happen by accident. Barbara mentioned this thing called the breaking of the vessels, which is going to be our discussion for the next few minutes. The breaking of the vessels did break. It was not an accident. God didn't trip and fall and shatter a vase and oopsies and then create the next world. God created a world before Atzilus and it didn't work. But God did not want it to work. There was a reason why God wanted this world to shatter. It's similar to if I want ash.
Why would he create it if he
We're gonna
wants to
get there. We're gonna get there. That's the point. If I need ash, what do? If I need ash,
burn?
I burn wood. If I need ash, right?
Yeah.
I am destroying. Why am I destroying the wood? Because I need something out of it. So God created this world of Toihu, because He wanted to get something from it. He wanted something to come out of Toihu that was important for His plan for the rest of creation. What was this world of Toihu? What was this world of chaos? This breaking of the vessels? And what does God need from this breaking of these vessels? That's what we're going to talk about now. But it's important for us to remember. This is actually always the danger of Kabbalah or learning these things. It's important for us to remember this was intentional. This was part of the plan. It was a step in the process of creation. It's part of the order of evolution. God needed something out of it. Okay? And we use expressions like breaking and overcharging because we just don't have words otherwise to convey it. So tohu, this word of tohu. What is tohu? Kabbalah tells us this was a whole other world that we're going to call tohu, the world of chaos. I think that's the name of today's lesson, actually, in the book. The world of chaos. Before the world of order, there was the world of chaos. What was this world of chaos? This world of chaos, let's read text 7a. Well, the Zohar will tell us, not the Zohar, this is one of the Rebbe tells us what happened in the world of chaos. Jimala, please, text 7a on page 121.
The lights of Torah were in
Tohu.
Tohu.
Exactly.
The lights of Tohu were intense and powerful. They intensely desired to be nullified and subsumed within their emanating source. They had no sense of what their source wanted of them. As a result, they failed to deviate from their default nature for the sake of submitting to their greater purpose.
So, to try to explain this as simply as possible, the way it's always talked about in Kabbalah is that the lights were too powerful. What does it mean that the lights were too powerful? What is a light? What is the defining attribute we've been saying of light? That light wants to go back to its source. That's the defining attribute of light. So what does a stronger light mean? A stronger light means a light that does not want to be here, that sees itself as going back to its source. That's all it wants to do. So these lights of the world of chaos, they wanted to go back to source. They were all about source. I wanted to go back to source. I don't want to be in these vessels. These vessels, I don't need this business. So they went back to their source. They were too powerful. What does it mean that they were too powerful? Because they were too light-like. All they cared about the fact was that I am light. Light goes back to source. Mission, purpose, that's none of my business. My business is being light. I am powerful light. What does light do? Goes back to source. So the more powerful the light, the more intense its desire to go back to its source.
Didn't God make them too powerful?
That's the point. And we're going to see why God did that. Obviously, God emanated them in such a way that they would be too powerful to be contained in the vessel. And what's interesting is that we'll see in the next text, there was a similar problem within the vessels of this world of chaos. Those vessels also, so I am vessels. God emanated me to be vessel. I'm all about definition. Leave me alone with this idea of going back to source. I don't care about source. I don't want to contain this light because this light is infinite. It's none of my business. The example they give in the next text is the idea of a wick not wanting to catch on fire. Actually, we're lighting the menorah now. It's the Hanukkah season. Oftentimes it happens. You're standing there holding the candle, and the wick doesn't want to light. It's not ready to be a vessel to the fire, right? Because I am a wick. Leave me alone. I don't want to be consumed by this light, to be a conduit for this light to express itself. I want to be vessel. That's what I am. I don't care. I care about the future. I don't care about my past. I don't care about my source. I want to make things concrete, distinct, and defined. Leave me alone with this infinite nonsense. It's none of my business. It has nothing to do with me. So the Kalim, the vessels, had an issue. They were like, bro, I don't need this infinite light. I don't need the source thing. And the lights also had an issue because they're like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. I want to go back to my source. So the lights were too powerful. They come to the vessels and they break them. They shatter them, quote unquote. And the lights ran back to God, and the vessels, the broken vessels, remained. All you have is broken vessels. You have a vessel that no longer contains that light. But at the same time, what's important to remember is that these vessels at one point did contain a light. They felt that light. They felt this overwhelming divine light. This untempered, that's actually a good word. This untempered light of godliness was once contained with them, and they sensed that and they felt that. And now but the light fled. The light's gone. So all it remembers is it remembers this light, but it no longer contains it. It's a vessel that no longer has this light within it. And this is the idea of chaos. This is what we call the world of tohu. This world tohu, I'm going to say it a lot. It's going to be important for us to remember this world of tohu. This is the world of chaos or desolation. You see over here, they say on the board, the problem was the lights refused to become defined, and the vessels didn't want to serve the light because we have our own job. And this is what it means. That the world of God hovered, meaning those lights, the light of God that was emanated into this world of chaos, hovered over the water, like it says in the book of Genesis, because it was no longer a light that was appropriate to help create the world. It ran back to its source. The lights slipped back to their source, And then, and the world became a place of chaos. The vessels ceased being receptacles. So what is a broken vessel? Here's actually an important. Think of again, it's Hanukkah time. So think of the little jugs of oil that you have in the menorah. So what is the thing of oil? What is its identity? It's not glass. When it as long as it contains the oil, it doesn't see itself as glass. All it is a receptacle for the oil. That's all it is. When you look at it, you don't say it's a glass. You say it's an oil container. What happens when it shatters? It's no longer able to do its job. It cannot contain the oil. And now it's its own identity. It's shattered glass. It's no longer subsumed to its purpose. A vase of flowers. If you look at the vase of flowers, what is it? What is its identity? If you ask it, what are you? I am a vase. What is my job? To contain flowers. You drop that vase on the floor, it no longer is able to be a vase that contains flowers. It cannot do its job. So if you ask these shards, what are we? We are shards. We are not a vase. We're not serving a higher purpose. We're here. We're doing our own thing right now. Once upon a time, we remember a time when we were containing something. Well, we're not there anymore. So this is Tahu. And I keep forgetting to say this, but on the flip side of our map, we have all of our terminology. So the way they define Tahu, a way for us to remember what the word Tahu means, or Tohu, I'm going to slip into my Ashkenazi way of pronouncing things. I apologize. They say Tahu is chaos, a system in which divine orot, or lights, and kalim, vessels, fail to sense God's ultimate purpose for which they had been emanated, resulting in the lights returning to their source and the vessels remaining without their lights. So now, okay, so that's how we got to Shviras HaKelim. The vessels no longer lend definition to lights, but become the standalone entities. So what's the solution? What was the next step? What did God do next? God created the world of tikkun. Anybody ever heard the word tikkun before?
Yeah.
What does tikkun mean?
Repair.
To repair. Tikkun olam is probably the most popular Jewish idea. And we roll our eyes at that, but no, it's an ancient Jewish idea. The sakin oilam amalcha shakai. A Jew's job is to repair the world.
Repair the vessels.
To repair the vessels. That's what Kabbalah says. We're repairing the vessels. After this world of chaos, God created the world of tikkun. This right here, Atzilus, everything down here, this is all the world of tikkun. It's the world of repair. Because now we have the chance of making things orderly, defined, the lights emanating in a way that it will be contained in the light in a productive way in order to be able to convey godly content. That is the world of tikkun. So now, what was the purpose of Tahu? What was the purpose of Tahu? Why did we first need to have this chaotic realm, this realm of chaos, and then have the realm of tikkun, this realm of order? What was the point? Why do we have to burn the wood to make the ash?
I don't know if I'm remembering the story correctly, but to give us a job to help repair the world.
That's true. That is part of it. That is part of it. So we're going to hold on to that.
Okay.
But even more than that, much more important than that, not much more important than that, as important than that, is that we should have this animal soul. There should be a source of the animal soul. That is from our animal soul comes from the world of tikkun.
Tikkun?
I'm sorry. Wow. Thank you. Tahu. The animal soul comes from the world of Tahu.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And this actually is a one-to-one comparison. We have two souls. One comes from Tahu, one comes from tikkun. Animal soul comes from Tahu, comes from chaos. Godly soul comes from tikkun, the world of order. And it plays out in many, many different ways. First of all, we call the animal soul first, like Yidi pointed out. We call the animal soul the first soul. The godly soul is called V'hanefesh Hashenis V'Yisrael, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. The second soul is the godly soul. Because whose source is higher? Whose source is first? What actually comes into our body first, like we said? The animal soul. You're born, a baby's born, and we live most of our lives. By the way, the default setting of a human being is to operate within the theater of the animal soul's consciousness. Because that's just what it means to be human. That we struggle with the animal soul. It's so much easier to identify with the animal soul. It was there first, and it's more dominant, and it's gratifying, but it's gratifying in the moment.
Yeah.
That's actually important. And what was Tahu? How did Tahu see itself? What is the definition of the world of chaos? Self-centered. I'm a light, leave me alone with this worrying about the vessels. I'm a vessel, leave me alone with the lights. I don't need the lights. I'm about myself. I want to be a vessel. I want to be a light. I don't care about the mission. The animal soul is, what do I want right now in this moment? What makes me feel good right now? What is gratifying in the moment? Microwave gratification. I press a button, bam, I feel good. But what is the godly soul? Because the godly soul comes from tikkun. It comes from a place where both the lights and the vessels were like, hold up. The lights were said, I know I want to go back to God, because that's what it means to be a light. I want to go back to God. And the vessels like, I want to flee God, because God is scary, say the vessels. I don't want to be with these lights because the lights, it's intimidating to me. But because I appreciate God's mission, I will submit myself to this greater plan and I will do my mission. I am mission oriented. So the godly soul is all about mission orientation. What can I do in this moment to make the world a better place? What can I do in this moment to bring joy to God, bring joy to another? And by the way, the reason why it's so important in Judaism, why our godly soul feels so important to help another person, is because it sees a piece of God in that other person. In the other person's soul, it sees a piece of God living within them, and it wants to please that godly soul too. There's an old Hasidic adage that the reason why when you have a problem, you should sit down with a friend and talk it over. And why it's so powerful to talk to another person to help you out is because when you have two people sitting down, you have two godly souls fighting one animal soul. Why is that? They each have an animal soul. They each have a godly soul. It's 2 on 2. So why does Chassidus tell us that it's 2 on 1? Because my animal soul sees your animal souls and could not care less. Your animal soul's problems are not my problems. I don't care. So my animal soul doesn't care about your issues. It's not going to get involved. My godly soul sees your godly soul and sees its issues. So like, what can I do to help you out? It's 2 godly souls against 1 animal soul. Deviation versus loyalty. The world of Toyu, because it didn't identify with its purpose, it didn't identify with its mission, so it did what it wanted. It didn't care what God wanted. So it deviated from its path. The animal soul does what it wants. You can live your whole life doing what you want. It's a tragic thing, but you could. Many people do. But what is the godly soul all about? I am loyal to others and I am loyal to God. Broken vessels versus complete vessels. This is actually also important. Barbara said it's gratifying to listen to your animal soul. But for how long? How long? Yeah. If you keep gratifying your animal soul, I promise you, at the end of the day, end of the week, end of the month, at some point you're going to feel broken. You will feel empty. The reason why here in America we're the most well-off to do people in the history of the world, but we're also the most depressed population in the history of the world, so we're constantly running after our broken vessels because we're constantly gratifying ourselves. So of course it's a bottomless pit that can't be filled. The animal soul is going to give me. I'm never going to be satisfied. It's constantly broken. The only way to actually feel wholesome and complete is if you access your complete vessels, which is the godly soul, being mission oriented, living for a higher purpose, living for others, living for God. But this is also why, because the animal soul comes from toihu, chaos, and the godly soul comes from tikkun, the world of order, the animal soul is stronger. The lights are stronger. The lights, which it came from, are even more powerful. So the animal soul can be more powerful. Not can be, is more powerful. Because that's its source. So one last point. What an important thing for us to remember is that the animal soul is a godly force, similar to the world of Toyu, similar to the world of chaos, which was an emanation of God that lost its way, lost touch with itself, and therefore became chaos. The animal soul is a godly force. But because it comes from this world of chaos, it, so to speak, lost touch with itself, and that's why it can run amok. That's why, because it has this untempered light within it, it can run amok and do its own thing, and ultimately lead us to not such great places. Barbara.
No, I wanted to say we need it because that's what gives us the drive to do better. So there was I don't know if anybody here watches television, but the original Star Trek, there were a lot of Jews that created that program.
Yeah, Leonard Nimoy, yeah.
And actors. So there were a lot of stories on there that you could go back to the Bible, you interpret. Right. Well, one of them was where the captain is divided in 2. Mm-hmm. This good part of him and the animal soul. Interesting. And he can no longer be the captain of the ship.
You need both.
Because he doesn't have that drive to make decisions, the other part of him is all good and wants to do good for everybody, but he doesn't have that decision-making power, that strength.
Fantastic.
So it shows that you need both.
Yes, very good. So one possible answer, by the way, why we need both, besides what Barbara's saying, the one idea is, imagine Jordan coming to the NBA, when he came to the NBA, and there were no Detroit Pistons. The bad boy. Anyone remember follow basketball back then? So what made Michael Jordan the man he was? What made him the greatest ball player of his time? The fact that he had to beat the Detroit Pistons. Because he had to face the Detroit Pistons, they made him a better basketball player. So there's this idea that why do we need the animal soul? In order to force the godly soul to work harder, to become better. But that just positions the animal soul as a foil to the godly soul. That is just there to serve another purpose, to serve somebody else, the godly soul. But the truth is the animal soul also has a mission, not just to be there to stand in the way of the godly soul, is there to do more. And we're going to read a couple of texts together. Text 9, this is from the Arizal. Text 9 on page 126. All the mitzvahs are designed exclusively to purify the animal soul and mortal body. By contrast, the divine soul does not require rectification. It has no intrinsic need to become instilled within an animal soul and mortal body. The sole purpose for doing so is for it to illuminate and rectify them. Understand this well. The reason the soul descends to this world is to rectify and to purify. We talked about Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam. The Arizal says all of Judaism is Tikkun Olam. All of Judaism is to rectify. What are we rectifying? We're rectifying the toihu. We're rectifying the chaos. The godly soul is a shtik ebishter. It's a piece of God. So what does it need to come to this world for? It needs to do mitzvahs to get merits. What does it need merits for? It's already holy. It's already godly. The point of the godly soul coming to this world is in order to interact with that animal soul, to show it. Together we're going to do mitzvahs. Together we will rectify your chaos. And together we're going to uplift the animal soul. The whole job of Judaism, the way the Arizal, the way Kabbalah understands it, the whole job of Judaism is Tikkun Olam. We don't mean Tikkun Olam as in social justice, which is important. And Tikkun Olam does not mean ecology, which is also important. But Tikkun Olam means rectifying the world, taking this realm of chaos and rectifying it, channeling it, showing it what its divine origin always was, showing it the truth of what it always was.
And it can rectify things by using what we call a negative energy. For instance, a perfect example, Israel bombing, Gaza. That's to rectify it eventually, but it's doing it in a negative, way. Killing people is not good.
Yes.
So I mean, it's a complex.
Remember we talked about the animal soul is more powerful, right?
Yes.
The animal soul is more powerful. So what you need to do, you have to harness it. When you take an animal, you want to use the animal.
Right.
Let's say, imagine an ox. An ox, by the way, a horse. How much horsepower do you think a horse can produce? It's 15.
15?
Yeah. Yeah. A horse produces 15 horsepower. Why it calls horsepower, I'm not totally sure. Whatever. But when you want to use horsepower, when you want to harness horsepower, what do you do to the horse? Do you break it? Do you shoot him in the head? Destroy it? No. You harness it. You show it how we're going to do something constructive. You're not just going to run wild and do whatever you want. Together, we're going to build something. Man and animal together, I harness you, and you help me. Together, we build something greater than ourselves.
Yet we emulate Gandhi, who was trying to eliminate his animal soul, work more on his divine soul.
So this tells us that's not the way.
Okay.
Kabbalah tells us that's not the way. It's not the way.
Okay.
Our job is to harness the godly soul. I'm sorry, the animal soul. Because the animal soul comes from a higher place, comes from a stronger source, and has more power within this world. If I can harness that energy, that the same energy that has me cheering at MetLife Stadium with my shirt off for the Jets, that same energy I could use to make a menorah lighting in the rain, right? That's the point. Because if it was just my godly soul, like Barbara said, my godly soul, I'll sit in the shul and we'll learn a little Torah, we'll have a Friday night meal, and that's great and that's wonderful. But God wants us to harness that energy within you, that raging energy within you. Here's a good idea, by the way. An example, we talked before about lights versus vessels. I should have mentioned something. Let's say a business plan versus actual strategies. You have a vision. When you have a business, you're supposed to have a vision of what I want it to be, but then there has to be actual concrete plans, right? So on a day-to-day, you have somebody who's just going to sit there and you're selling, let's say you want to, I don't know, you want to become an egg tycoon, selling eggs. I want to become the biggest egg salesman in North America. So that's my vision. But then you could also be blinkered by every single day. What do I need to do every single day? Sell a couple of eggs, right? That's what I need to do. But if I lose sight of that vision, what am I going to end up doing? Just going to keep selling a couple of eggs. You need to have that energy. You need to have that wild energy. Look at Silicon Valley, by the way. The most successful companies of the past 30 years, you know what their ethos was? Move fast and break stuff, right? All these guys, they didn't go to college. They didn't learn the way to do business the normal way. It was all wild and chaotic. But because it was wild and chaotic, and they were able to harness that energy eventually in order to build these behemoths that are, destroying the world. But whatever. All these companies, they're destroying the planet, but that's not the point. You have to be able to harness that wild, chaotic energy, because that wild, chaotic energy could take me to a place that if I was just orderly and going step by step, I would never get to. So when it comes to our Judaism or our connection to the Eibishter, our connection to God, the godly soul, like Barbara was saying, you just, clock in, clock out, do its thing. And but the animal soul, because it's so chaotic and because it's so energetic and has all this power, it's striving constantly to make it happen. And how do you make it happen? So how do you harness the animal soul? So Judaism tells us very simply, mitzvahs. You do mitzvahs. You do actionable things. When I put on tefillin or I light Shabbos candles, what's happening in that moment? My animal soul, either it's not yet understanding, or eventually it will understand that right now I don't want to put on tefillin. I don't want to take 10 minutes out of my day, wake up a half hour early to run to shul, or make sure I'm home early enough to light the Shabbos candles Friday night. It gets in the way of my life, right? The animal soul doesn't appreciate it. But if the godly soul can influence it in such a way that it sees that when I do this mitzvah, I am rectifying you and God's world. We're doing tikkun olam together. That's how you help harness the animal soul. Another way is prayer. I'm sorry we're rushing a little bit because we're running out of time. Another way is prayer. In text 10, we have a great story about this very spiritual person. When he would daven, when he would pray, he would have the prayer book, and the prayer book is in Hebrew. And every time he would pray, one of his friends noticed that he would translate everything into Yiddish. Happens to be, it's a little halakhically problematic to start speaking in the middle of davening, in the middle of prayer. So he's saying, why are you translating everything into Yiddish? He said, my animal soul understands Yiddish better than Hebrew. Why are we davening? What's the point of davening? To talk to God, to connect to God. The godly soul also needs time to talk to God, but it's much more important that the animal soul have this chance to talk to God, to connect to the Eibishter, to connect to God. So this chassid, when he used to daven, he would daven in Yiddish, because my animal soul understands Yiddish better, right? Because the purpose of the davening is not only for the godly soul, it's primarily for the animal soul, because the animal soul also needs to be able to see itself as part of God's greater plan. But a very important idea for us to remember, or not remember, to learn together, is that this tikkun olam aspect, this rectification, this trying to harness the animal soul, it's not reserved when we're praying, and it's not reserved for when we're learning Torah, and it's not reserved for when we're doing mitzvahs. Us Jews have an obligation, like it says in the verse, know God in all of your ways. What does this mean? Know God in all of your ways. What does it mean to know God in all of your ways? It's very easy to know God when you're davening. It's very easy to know God when you're learning Torah. It's very easy to know God when I'm lighting Shabbos candles, I'm giving charity. But what do we do most of the day? A normal, healthy person, what are we doing most of the day? You're not davening, you're not praying, you're not learning Torah, you're not doing mitzvahs. You have a 9 to 5, you have kids at home, you have to change diapers, you have to pay the bills, and we also have to worry about the upcoming election. It's very important. We have all these things that take up most of our day. And when are we supposed to be seeking God? We're not seeking God in shul. That's not when we seek God. It's very easy to seek God in shul. We're supposed to be seeking God when we're at work, when we're at home, when I'm at the gym. There's 2 ways you could go to the gym. You could go to the gym with your animal soul, that I want to go to the gym because it makes me feel good. I want to look good and I want to feel good. Or you could go to the gym that this is going to make me healthy and this is going to help me mentally healthy, physically healthy, and I'll be able to do more good with this healthy body. You could go out to brunch with your friends in 2 ways. I could go out to brunch because I like the mimosas and I like the eggs Benedict and it makes me feel good and walk away. Or I'm going to brunch with my friends because now I can connect with another person and I'm deepening this relationship. And also, by the way, parenthetically, I make a blessing before I drink the mimosa, before I eat the eggs Benedict. And I make sure the eggs Benedict is kosher and the mimosas are kosher, because in that way, I'm doing something holy while I'm drinking the mimosas. Right? Every Jewish festival, what's the crux of every Jewish festival? They try to kill us, God save us, let's eat. It sounds very coarse and very grub, like we say in Yiddish, very simplistic, but that is Judaism. God saved us, now we're going to eat. Because God wants us to be here in this world, and we're going to take those potatoes, we're going to turn it into latkes, and we're going to make it something holy. That we're carrying out the traditions.
So
and that
we're the vessel.
we have both.
No, but the light of the two souls. That's what it's, the two.
Oh, so there is-
souls of the light.
so
and the body.
On one level, the soul is the light, and the body is the vessel. That is true. That is true. I think on the figure 4:1, wherever that was.
It's like a man. It's like a
Yes,
human.
yes, exactly. The Lubavitcher Rebbe once, by Farbrengen, was talking about when you go to work. Jane said, when do you spend most of your life? You spend the majority of your life working. That's just the fact of the matter. So the Rebbe actually said that every person, whatever they do for a living, they have to see how I could take a lesson in my avodas Hashem, in my service of God, from my work, from what I do. So the Rebbe gave two examples. The Rebbe said an attorney, and a defense attorney, right? A defense attorney, what's he trying to do? He's trying to exonerate his client. No matter how flimsy the evidence to exonerate his client is, what's he going to do? He's trying to find that little kernel of good within that client. That's his entire job. What's the lesson in our service of God? When you look at another person, ultimately, what do we need to look for? We need to look for that little kernel of good, that little, what we call spark of God, the pintaliyid, that little spark of God within you. By the way, speaking of Hanukkah, that's that little jug of oil which was never contaminated. That jug of oil can never be contaminated in another Jew. So just like an attorney has to find how to exonerate his client, you have to look at every Jew, every other person, and see what is good and what is worthy within them. Because it's true of everybody, by the way. And then the Rebbe said also an engineer. What does an engineer do? An engineer can design a machine with many different parts. Some are more important than another. So somebody like me, I could look at a machine and I assume that if I take out this screw or I take out this component, it'll work anyways. Like, it's superfluous. Not everything is for a specific reason because I don't understand. But an engineer looks at everything and sees how everything's important. Now, every aspect of this device is important to make this device function better. So as a person, we have to look at all the mitzvahs that we're given and see how all these mitzvahs, most of us, we look at one mitzvah, this is important to me, but that mitzvah, whatever, right? But what Kabbalah tells us that we need to do is look at all these mitzvahs and recognize that they're all important and they're all valuable. So the last idea that we're saying about the animal soul is that we have to be able to look at our entire lives as a whole and use it to better serve the Eibusher. We're going to finish with the story, and if you want to stay afterwards to watch the video, we can watch the class video together, but we're just going to end off with the story now. The story told that there was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe, a follower of the first Chabad Rebbe, who had a son who was he was a very charismatic dude, very talented young man, but he wasn't really into the program, the whole Jewish program. And one of the things he did, which was a really big chutzpah back in the day, he used to ride a horse. Now, riding a horse sounds very silly, that it should be a problem, but it's kind of like, imagine if a yeshiva boy shows up to yeshiva with a Lamborghini. Does it say anywhere in the Torah you can't have a Lamborghini? No, but like it's an attitude thing, right? You don't drive a Lamborghini. So back in the day, you couldn't drive a horse. If you want to get from one place to the other, rent the wagon. This idea of riding a horse was like considered out there. So the Alter Rebbe invites him in to talk to this kid, and he asked this kid, he was very proud of his horse, and he starts talking to him about the horse. And they said, my horse is unlike anybody else's horse you've ever met. It's faster, stronger, and it's more durable. So Alter Rebbe said, but why would you ever want to ride a horse? What's the point of riding a horse? So the kid, why do I want to ride a horse? Because it goes fast. And it gets me to my destination faster. So the Alter Rebbe says, and what if you get lost? You get further from your destination faster if you're on the horse. You end up more lost. So the kid said, yeah, that's true. But as mechaptzich, once we realize that we're lost, you turn around and you get back to your destination even faster. So Alter Rebbe says, as mechaptzich, as mechaptzich. We have to realize that we have this animal soul. This animal soul is super powerful. It's super powerful and it's super energetic, but we need to realize when we're lost. And once we realize we're lost, once we realize that we're able to harness the animal soul, don't let it lead us around, lead the animal soul around, as mechaptzich, then we're able to use the power and the energy of that horse, so to speak, the animal soul, in order to become better people and better serve God. Look at that, everybody.
Right on.
With 10 seconds left. Unbelievable. So to recap today, we introduced the idea of the two souls, the doctrine of the Nefesh Elokis and the Nefesh Bahamis, the animal soul and the godly soul. And we discussed how is it possible that if we come from godliness and if we're all mapped on Seder Shtalshus, the order of devolution, where does the animal soul come from? So we introduced the idea of the world of chaos, the world of Tohu, that the lights were too powerful and the vessels were unwilling, and therefore the lights returned to their source and the vessels shattered. And we said that our animal soul comes from the world of Tohu, and our godly soul comes from the world of Tikkun, and the job is to use the godly soul to harness the power and the unfathomable energy of chaos of the godly soul, of the animal soul, in order to better rectify the world, the Sakin Olam Malchushakai, to rectify the world and ultimately come to God's plan. So thank you everybody very much for joining us. Happy Hanukkah. The important thing about Hanukkah is, like we said before, that little cruse of oil that the Maccabees found, the Greeks were not able to touch, that exists within all of us. We have that neshama that cannot be contaminated. And we always are, every Jew, every person is valuable, no matter how we live their lives to this point. You have to see that in another Jew, you have to see that in another Yid, and with more light we bring into this world, we inspire ourselves, we inspire others, until we light up ultimately the entire world, and we will merit the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu speedily in our time. 4 hours time, God willing, the menorah lighting. I would love to see you all there. If you come there, I have a limited edition Hanukkah beanie for all JLI participants. A Hanukkah beanie. As always, if you have any questions, if you need to discuss this class further, I know that it's this was a lot. I appreciate that, and I understand that it's a little esoteric, even compared to last week. But I would love to discuss it with you further. And if you would like to hang around and watch the class video, seems like I didn't download it, so I'll send it in the email. So that's what you're gonna have to look out for, the class video in the email. Happy Hanukkah, everybody. Happy Hanukkah. Hope to see you all later today.
If you don't have a fuse box or
Right. Thank you. It was a great session.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah, Lisa. I'm going to end the recording.